Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals, and Seth Cox from AvengeOfTheBirds.com. The Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation's family of sites is on the show with me, as is almost always the case, but co-host. He is also one of the co-hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, whose co-host, Justin Higdon, we had on the last edition of the show when we were talking about takeaways from the Senior Bowl. This is episode 346, and we've got a lot to talk about. Super Bowl, Kyler Murray drama. This is not the stuff we really want to talk about. And then, which was the kind of the offseason show we had planned on, is talking about positional needs. We're going to go position by position. What, not who, but what are their needs at each position. Seth, before we talk about Kyler Murray, let's delve into this Super Bowl just a little bit. What was your take on the game? I mean, I will actively say that I wished neither team could win this game because I didn't want the Rams to win, but I also did not want the Bengals to get a Super Bowl win before the Cardinals. I think that's absurd. And also the notion of that the Cardinals had lost to the eventual, and if the Super Bowl champions, that softens at least a little bit the loss. On my betting preview for Sportsbook Wire, I had the Rams winning, covering, and the total going under. And if it weren't for a botched extra point attempt by the Rams early in the game, I would have hit on all three. But Super Bowl takeaways from you. What did you think overall of the game?
I thought it was fun. I thought both quarterbacks didn't play extremely well, but they made plays at specific times. We even saw that the two best plays from Joe Burrow were an insane one-handed catch by Jamar Chase and a clear penalty that got missed on T. Higgins for a touchdown. And I think that was 124 of his yards and his only touchdown in the game. But, those guys gave their team a chance on both sides. I think you saw how valuable receivers are. We saw Odell Beckham Jr. blow out his knee on a bad throw from Matthew Stafford behind him. So, if he hits him in stride, who knows when that thing, pops. But it definitely took the flow out of their offense for a while.
And my goodness, Cooper Kupp. Holy cow.
Yeah, and Kupp, I don't even know if he should have been in on that last play. After the headshot he took on the previous one, right?
Player safety.
Right, but at least I can say it was the Super Bowl, so I'll give him that. That's a little different than, week 3 of the NFL season when some of these guys are like, no, I'm fine, I can keep playing. But man, I think at the end of the day, you just saw that Aaron Donald is maybe the best player in the world. He's definitely the best defensive player in the world. And all of that, produced an enthralling game until Donald decided that the game was going to be over, right? He was like, well, I'm not going to let this get as close as it looks like it's going to be. And so it was a fascinating game. I think if you really paid attention, I thought that you saw that all these coaches and quarterbacks all have flaws. And what I mean by that is, you go watch that game back, right? You go watch how that game went, and the ebbs and flows of the game. And there were issues from Burrow. There were issues from obviously Matthew Stafford with the 2 interceptions. And then there were issues from Zach Taylor and Sean McVay, and Sean McVay is supposed to be the best new coach in the NFL. And there were decisions he made in the game that you were literally like, what are you doing, man? And so all that to say is, I think when you look at the quarterback situation, the coach situation, the Cardinals are in a good spot. I think when you look at the talent situation at certain positions, and when you look at it from the Bengals perspective, and you see their offensive talent, especially when you look at their running backs and wide receivers, and then you look at the Rams defensive talent, not just the all pro, all world Aaron Donald, but I mean, when you're talking about they're going to get a guy like Von Miller during the trade deadline, 2 years ago, trading away a bunch of picks for Jalen Ramsey. All of that has set this team up to be great. And that's what you have to look at, the short and long term aspects of, is can the Cardinals do something similar, or are they going to have to go the Bengals route, where it's a lot of like veterans playing one great season, staying healthy for the most part, and then a lot of youth along the offensive side of the ball, all growing together.
Right. You saw two different ways to build a team, obviously, and if you look at the Bengals, they actually match a lot of the Chiefs championship team 2 years ago, because
that is a great.
They have the offensive weapons, but what they went out and did is invested in veterans on the defense to improve that defense, and honestly, that was probably the difference this year. Well, it's two major differences. One, the defense was good, and two, they invested youth on offense. They happened to hit the jackpot with Jamar Chase. I think,
I don't think we can understate.
Goodness,
how great he is of a player.
I don't feel bad in saying he's probably a top 5 receiver already. He has every single trait, because he's got the speed, he's got the catch radius, the route running ability, he's got the length. He is a special player, and most of us, you probably look across the board, a lot of analysts felt that they should take an offensive lineman, take like a Penei Sewell or Sean Slater, whoever it was, to protect Joe Burrow instead of going and getting the playmaker. And at least because of just how good Chase was, that was the right pick, because it elevated. Look how much better Burrow was with it. It was very much like when they added Hopkins, and for Josh Allen when they had Stephon Diggs. But on the interesting side is, as much as he elevated his presence, elevated the play of Burrow and the Bengals overall, what ended up biting the Bengals in the butt ultimately, it was their lack of protection for him. But it was their line just had to be good enough. Unfortunately, that wasn't good enough against a Rams team that, they built it differently. They sold out. They sold their future for a championship now and got it. But they also made some nice picks. Like, they got plays from Ernest Jones, who's developed into a very nice young linebacker. They have a couple of safeties. So while Eric Weddle was back there, the play of Taylor Rapp, and what was the kid Nick Scott, who played during the playoffs, was fantastic. They've got the trio of running backs. But then they went out and made bold moves when they needed it. And even though that depth was needed, because then Odell Beckham got hurt, you look at two different ways to build a championship team. And because we've seen it from the Bengals and the Chiefs now, you almost wonder if the Cardinals maybe went around, like, if they went about it not quite the right way, because they ended up putting youth on defense, and it was the defense that ended up, the offensive decline. But I also, you look at the defensive play declined immensely in the last part of the season.
Yeah, and that's one of the things you talk about is the depth of this team. I mean, you look at it from the you look at it and we'll go, positional groups, and this will, roll into something we'll talk about later. But the defensive line, obviously, it was the Rams. Defensive line is better. The linebackers, it should be the Cardinals, right? With all that they've invested. But a lot of times that play of the defensive line makes the linebackers better and allows them to do more things. And that's just quite frankly what it is. I'm not sure if you took Dearness Jones and put him on the Cardinals that he's even as even getting reps, right? But
Yeah.
playing behind Ashawn Robinson, who's a guy you and I talked about the Cardinals signing, right? Like they needed a big run-stopping defensive tackle. That was Ashawn Robinson, and then of course Aaron Donald, and then Leonard Floyd, who's turned into just a dynamic, secondary pass rusher. And then when Floyd becomes your third pass rusher because you've got Donald and then Von Miller, like that's just
It's devastating.
nightmare.
Their defense was, well, and ultimately that Rams team, they became the team we thought they were going to be entering this season. And I said that in the last couple of shows, is that despite the disappointment and everything that happened with the Cardinals, what you saw at the end of the year was the Rams being, to take Dennis, like they are who they are who we thought they were. The Rams became who we thought they were. An absolutely devastating team defensively, and with a quarterback who was an upgrade over Jared Goff, who was a better playmaker, was definitely flawed at times, but his quarterback play elevated that team ultimately down the stretch because he was more of a playmaker than just a good, decent quarterback to run the scheme that Sean McVay has.
Right, and that's what it's going to come down to, man, is that as good as their offense could be at times, at the end of the day, they could lean on their defense to get stops and make plays. And that's something that the Cardinals could do early in the season, but once Watt got injured, once Robert Alford and Marco Wilson went down, it just became a matter of time until they were out of reach, right? Games were out of reach. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what it is. That's one of the things that we talk about all the time. Luck is 100% involved
Absolutely.
in getting to a Super Bowl. And the fact that, Aaron Donald was healthy, and the fact that Aaron Donald's been healthy his whole career has been, amazing. But the fact that Odell doesn't get hurt until
the Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl. The fact that they're able to get that an Odell Beckham's available after Robert Woods goes down. The fact that Sony Michel's available after Cam Akers goes down. Jalen Ramsey doesn't get hurt. They don't lose any of their true stars. And then somehow Adam Whitworth, who, you know what? I know I'm not allowed to say this, but I'm glad that guy finally won a Super Bowl, man. Like, that's cool.
Well, I'll say the state Stafford too. Like, Stafford to me was Carson Palmer, and I hate it. And we've been doing the show long enough. If you've been paying attention to the show back in 2016, 2017, if the Cardinals were going to go out and somehow get a veteran quarterback, Stafford was the guy I wanted. I thought he was a perfect match for Bruce Arians. I thought he was going to be Carson Palmer-like in his impact on the Rams, and yeah, it's good to see a guy like Stafford, who's been as good as he's been in his career, who's languished as long as he did in Detroit, to get rewarded. It's fun. Like, aside from the part where we root for a team, as I've covered the NFL for the last 10 years, more and more you start to root for individuals, and a guy like Matthew Stafford is really easy to root for.
Oh, 100%. And so that's what it boils down to when you look at it, is that this was a team, and like you said, that the Bengals, outside of Burrow and Chase, I don't know if you would have said at any position they were better. But Burrow and Chase do just make so many plays. I mean, think about it. Jamar Chase catches a one-handed 50-yard pass that sets up the first touchdown. And like we talked about, like T. Higgins, I'll give him credit. He got away with it. So it was a legal play at the end, right? And it's crazy to see where they're at. But then that brings us back to what we talked about earlier. It's a lot of luck, and we all kind of grimaced, right, when Joe Burrow took that shot to the knee, and we go, "Oh damn, maybe they should have drafted Rashawn Slater or Penei Sewell," right? But yeah, this was a fun game, and it just showed you that there are two paths the Cardinals can take to get to the Super Bowl. It just feels like that they're trying to find a third path going down the middle of that road, right?
Right. Well, I think it was because of the way it was kind of built. But and I think what it is that Steve Keim can't get out of his way. He was like, when he saw the linebacking back in 2013, Darrell Washington and Carlos Dansby, and he's just hasn't been able to recreate that.
Yeah, and he's just been searching for it, right? Like, and sometimes it's just go with the guys, like, and we'll get to. I mean, I guess this is as good as any, is this transition to the Kyler conversation, right? It's like whether or not we agree with the approach he's taking, and I would say that neither of us, as kind of older guys, think that it's been the best way to go about things. Now, to be fair, too, he's literally not said anything until he released a statement that was Sunday, right? Or was it Monday?
It was Monday. Monday he tweeted that.
Yeah, and so he finally released a statement. So that was literally the first thing he said at all, because before that it was just a bunch of us, all discussing what we thought it meant, right? Like, oh, this is what that means. That he deleted all his posts, so that means he's breaking up with the Cardinals. But yeah, so yeah, it's an interesting thing. But I think when you look at it from that perspective, it does go into where this is going. One of the things that gets noted a lot on Twitter, and again, I'm not going to say it's the appropriate way to do things, is Kyler likes a lot of comments about Tristan Wirfs and CD Lamb, and an inordinate amount where you go, I wonder if he's trying to say something here.
So yeah, let's pause right there and come back to this topic real quick. So coming next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, we will talk about the whole Kyler Murray scenario. We thought we were going to be done with this when it was just an Instagram thing. It's gotten a whole lot worse, guys. It's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Oh boy, if only it were just the Instagram scrub, deletion, whatever you want to call it. If only it were that. Super Bowl Sunday. Why? Sunday morning, over the weekend, Chris Mortensen comes out with a report saying that sources within the organization say that Kyler Murray is immature. He is not a leader. He is a finger pointer. He is selfish, self-centered. What in the world is this organization doing if it's leaking that now? And Kyler rightly feels like he's being blamed for it. So first and foremost, so on Twitter, like for those of you who know me, I haven't been much to make a lot of waves of Twitter, but I think I've made more enemies on Twitter in the last week tweeting about Kyler and Steve Keim than I have in the last decade. That said, I don't understand. So while Kyler is not flawed, he is their franchise quarterback, and probably I'll say he's the best young quarterback this franchise has ever had. He might be the greatest quarterback if he continues on his. He'll be the greatest quarterback. In fact, he's done some things that not even Kurt Warner, not even Carson Palmer has done. And I know people like to gripe at the idea of Pro Bowls. He's been to more Pro Bowls than either. He's been to as many Pro Bowls as Carson Palmer and Kurt Warner combined. Now I know Pro Bowl, but I'm going to hold to this. Yes, it is part popular, but it's part fan vote, which is driven, but other awards are not voted on by coaches and players. The Pro Bowl is. The other, like all pros, that's voted on by 50 Associated Press writers throughout the country. 50 guys. 50 guys who are probably mostly my age and older for the most part. Just, I don't understand what the organization is doing here. And I have my suspicions because based on it sounds like it's only speculation, but the type of comments that were made and the way they were said, and then adding to that things that have been said by Mike Garofalo of NFL Network and then Tuesday by Jim Trotter, this feels like it's coming out of the general manager's office because I don't see how Michael Bidwill would want to say that one. And Cliff Kingsbury literally never would say because I think the guy simply is in awe that he gets to coach him.
Yeah, and when you look at it, there's a couple things you can take from it. One, you've got the fact that this team is not, they've never had any player push back. They've never had a player that's really demanded more from the organization. And people are going to react to this negatively, and I'm fine with that. But we always were okay with Larry Fitzgerald, and everybody's like, man, look how loyal he is. And I'm like, it's really easy to be loyal when you're the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. Like, it's really easy to be loyal when the organization's basically telling you, hey, do whatever you want, and when you come back, we'll give you $11 million. Right? That was the last, I believe, 5 or 6 years of his contract. And people go, that's what a leader should look like. And maybe it is. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe quietly going about your business and hoping that a franchise that's never been prolific in winning is going to find lightning in a bottle once or twice in your career. And that's what happened for Fitz, right? They've had 2 deep playoff runs in his career. He played well in most of them, and he's historically one of the better playoff wide receivers, and he stepped up in big games, and he's also been a part of a lot of losing seasons. I mean, a lot of losing seasons. And so to see a player that allegedly is willing to push back against the organization, it's going to make people mad. It's going to rub people the wrong way, especially an organization that has never had that happen before. And so now you've got a guy that's doing things, saying things that maybe are not the norm. And so what's going to happen is these older guys in the organization are going to be like, well, he's just immature. That's going to be the response. And in doing that, you're creating this side choosing. Right now, all of a sudden, it's like, are you team Cardinals or are you team? And it's like, no, they're all on the same team, right? Like they should be, at least. This would be a devastating situation to have a rift like this come in on a team that's been progressing for the last 3 years. and now it's threatening to be potentially the end of that progression, and all of that, is an issue, and that's what you have to look at. And man, I don't know what to think of an organization leaking something like that to the press. But here's what we know: Chris Mortensen is a veteran NFL reporter, and he's going to carry the water of the NFL and the franchises. That's what he has done for a long time. That's what he does now. Um, that's not to say that this may not be accurate, or even something that somebody within the organization feels. But it's an odd, like you said, it's odd to come out now in this way.
And it's just like, what other organization, in what other scenario would you ever see a team's young franchise quarterback that they have said they believe in? Why they would let that sort of thing come out? It doesn't make any sense at all. Do they think that it's going to motivate Murray? No, it's just going to piss him off.
Well, and to be fair, this franchise has never had to deal with it, man. Like they've never won. They've never had a young franchise quarterback, right? Like
No,
something
no.
that you've hit on multiple times, that this is literally the best young quarterback this team has ever had. Um, Not just best, first, right? Like he's literally the first guy that you've seen, and you're like, man, this guy could be the franchise. So you've got that. You've got the fact that whoever it is somebody that's worried about the perception and how they come out in all of this, which is unfortunate because that shouldn't be it. Like all this should be about is the franchise getting better, but it's not happening. And you made a comment off the air that I think is super poignant. And Dan Bickley wrote about it, and we talked about this. When he talked about they need to move on from Cliff, and that was that Cliff is a yes man. Um, Cliff doesn't concern himself with the what do they say, the J's and Joes. He's more of the X's and O's guy, right? He doesn't worry about the guys, and
And
that
that's
might
not his role. In fact, he was like, Keim is, from what I understand, has 100% control of the roster, which is why you, like last year, okay, 2020, seventh round pick, Benjamin. Cliff didn't think he was going to make it. Keim insisted he was on the roster. He never played. He was never active. This year, Andy Isabella is still on the roster. Cliff never uses him. That's called Keim insisting that they're still on the roster, they have value, and Cliff just doesn't find a place for him.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, man. It really is. This is just you feel like this is a team that just doesn't, that are everybody's not on the same page. And that's unfortunate, but it's also, I mean, that's just how sometimes these things work. And there's definitely a happy medium that can be met between Ken Wisenhunt costing himself his coaching career, and Cliff being completely laissez-faire, or about how the franchise builds its team, right?
Yeah. Wisenhunt, who, after he got the Super Bowl, he's like, no, I want to put the roster together. Yeah, that didn't
Well,
work.
and you do, and so like this is complete speculation.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I want everybody to understand this part, but like you wonder if this is almost stemming from BA too, right? Like the hesitancy, because we do know that BA had much more say so and was much more involved in situations than Cliff is. And you wonder if the way that they built that team, and then ended up, basically painting themselves to a corner after they went for it all in 2016 and it didn't work out. If and then obviously we know how the story ends with BA bailing and then the Cardinals being a laughing, getting the number one pick the next season, and so you wonder if that's where this all stems from. Like, hey, I'm not going to give a guy that much control again. I'm going to be the guy that makes the decisions. I'm going to be the guy that builds this roster, and I'm not going to let anybody tell me how to do it or what to do, and then I'm going to live and die by that situation. And so,
and if he keeps it up, it's gonna
yeah,
be the end of him.
right. And that's the thing. So if that's almost begrudgingly, you kind of have to respect it, right? You're like, well, apparently you're okay losing your job because you're just so intent on making sure that it's done your way. So, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. But so far, you look at it, and this is a really an unprecedented situation for me because we know uh, of disgruntled quarterbacks. I mean, hell, Eli Manning came into the NFL disgruntled.
Right?
Like,
He came into the NFL and said, "No, Chargers, don't draft me," and then okay, trade me to the freaking Giants. Of all of this, you know. Each time that there's been a prominent reporter saying something from what they've heard within the organization, it has softened. Mortenson's was the damning comments. Mike Garofalo, it softened to things they want to work on. They want him to work on being a more vocal leader, his body language. Those are completely viable. They're things that have been mentioned before. Down to Jim Trotter on Tuesday, and I think his was stated the best, is that even with the start this last season, who is Kyler Murray, and there's people in the organization they're not sure because he's a little reclusive. That's the type of guy. He's quiet. He's not the vocal leader. He wants to lead by example, and there's nothing wrong with that, except it doesn't always vibe right at the quarterback position, and so they want to see him go out and reach out and connect with guys to elevate them so that they want to be led by him. And I want to point out that it's not like he doesn't have that connection, because he certainly does with some players. I think it's very, very clear. He's close with Christian Kirk. DeAndre Hopkins, he has a great relationship with. I believe most of the skill players, he's on pretty good terms. Probably not AJ Green, but Max Williams loves him. Zach Ertz, when the second Zach Ertz joined the team, he was with him kind of, and maybe it is, we talked about this off the air, I think there might be a level of where Kyler needs his teammates maybe to prove their willingness, their mettle, their dedication to the goals before he, really gets close. So a guy like I'll take, because I've seen on the sideline, Josh Jones, a guy that was frustrating for all of us to watch. Kyler has some issues with, I'm sure, because he keeps messing up on mental stuff, which is really hard for him to tolerate. And so if we're saying that he's a very good quarterback who's a franchise, we know he is a franchise quarterback. I believe that. He's a franchise quarterback who has things to work on. Every quarterback has things to work on. But we cannot have someone in organization within that front office talking about their young quarterback in that way. It's inexcusable.
Right, exactly. And that's the only way you can look at it from that perspective, is that it's just not something that can happen, and it's not something that happens in great organizations. And what we mean by that is you look at the situation in Seattle. It's a nightmare, and there's a lot of concerns for a number of these guys about how this is going to finish. But you haven't heard anything about Russell. Aaron Rodgers has basically turned into a giant, walking billboard of an issue. And what do the Packers do? They basically just say, "Please don't leave. We will do whatever you want. Here's $50 million, and we'll go get who are your buddies? Like, who do you want to play with? That's who we'll go get for you."
We'll go get Cobb. We'll get him
Yeah,
back.
we'll go get Randall Cobb back because we know you like him, and even though he's not, he's got no juice left in the tank. Like that's and you and I are not saying that's what the Cardinals need to do, but I don't think it's unreasonable to give your franchise quarterback some decision making things. Some things where you look at it and you go, all right, this is, we like this about this guy, and what do you think? And giving him some, allowing him to have some feedback on situations. Um, and I think that's one of the big issues here is that it's almost gotten to the point where it seems like Keim is sticking his foot in the ground and saying, "I'm not letting anybody help me. Like, I'm making these decisions. I'm going to do this, and we're going to win or lose by those decisions." And it's like, man, that's an interesting way to do things. Let's see if it works out in the end, right?
Oh, we've spent way too much time on these two topics. But let's move on to the stuff that I know that's the part one people want to hear about. That's what's getting all the clicks right now. Like Kyler Murray is the NFL story right now. It's not the Super Bowl's done. Nobody's talking about the Bengals anymore. The Rams are great, and Kyler Murray now. It's about Kyler Murray and the Cardinals. Whew. And yeah, I don't love seeing this from the team. But coming next on the Rest of Seared podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We'll come back and talk about what we originally scheduled this show specifically to be about, which is positional needs this offseason. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let us talk about position for position, position by position, because a little bit English, Spanish jumping in there. Each position on the offensive, defensive side of the ball. We're not going to talk about specific players, but what do they need, not who do they need as we go into this offseason. What do they need to address? Do they need starter? Do they need number one? They need two? Do they need just depth? That's what we're going to look at, and we're going to cover first basically the quarterback position and skill positions on offense. So I think obviously they don't need a starting quarterback. They need to fix things with their starting quarterback. In my opinion, a guy like Colt McCoy is great and needed on this team. I believe that Colt will be a priority, but I think you need, for Kyler, a veteran backup who's been a starter, who's been in the league a long time, and has a cachet of respect for all. And I think Colt McCoy, I say we're not going to talk about who, but someone like Colt McCoy, whether it's him or another guy that Kyler already comes in, that he already comes in and Kyler has high respect for him.
Yeah, somebody that he can trust and work with, and that's all. That's all stuff that they need right now is, I think, just a veteran that can kind of do what Colt did this year. I think re-signing Colt just makes too much sense.
Right. Yeah. And he has, like, it's perfect because he was a star in Texas. Cliff has said this. Kyler already respected the hell out of him when he was in high school. Colt McCoy was Texas football. He was the star. And were it not, he talked about this before, is that were it not for that injury in the championship, his career in the NFL might have gone much, much differently. And I also have said before, had he come into the league the way the quarterback position is being played now, he might still be a star.
Yeah, he could, even if he's not a star, he's definitely a guy that could, get more run and be a guy that like a Kirk Cousins type. But it was all about that shoulder issue, man. It basically took him from being a guy that could be, you know, I'm trying to think like a Jeff Garcia, Kirk Cousins type of quarterback to a guy like end of the line Chad Pennington, that where his arm just was so bad he can't consistently push the ball vertically. And if you watch those games with the Cardinals, this season, they succeeded most when they were able to run the ball well because that sets up play action and gives Colt little bigger windows. Um, it's not they're not he's not the guy pushing the ball down the field or throwing those 17-yard dig routes, where the ball's got to go 35 yards in 2 seconds. That's just not his bag, but he's great in this offense and he's great in the locker room, and in the quarterback room.
That running back, I think it's very clear they need two starting so they either need a very clear number one. They need they need a combo like Chase and James Conner. They need two backs who can share the load, and if one is unavailable, carry the load. I think it's clear. I think they're okay on depth, but running back depth you can literally find pretty much anywhere, right?
Yeah, and you look at it, this draft has a lot of those guys that could potentially be an every down back. And so it'll be interesting to see if it's a priority in the draft or not. But it's definitely a need because you look at it, even if you assume you get one of Connor Edmonds back, they both prove that you need another guy with them.
Right, and maybe, and we'll talk more about what that means. But maybe you bring back Connor and think that Eno can take the step, but I wouldn't trust that Eno's going to be the guy. But either way, you need two starting caliber guys.
Right, and even if you did that, even if you said, okay, we'll bring Connor back, we'll give Eno a shot, that doesn't exclude you from being able to grab a guy in the late third or in the fourth round. That, in fact, that's what that would do is you'd say, hey, a guy that we talked about last week, hey, Brian Robinson, right, from Alabama, you're 6'2" and 240 or 230 pounds, and have very little wear for most Bama running backs. Come run here, that type of stuff. So, but yeah, I think you're correct, and I think that's what it's hard to be like, oh, this is a priority, but I think in this offense, you've seen that it is a priority.
Yeah. At wide receiver, you obviously have DeAndre Hopkins. You've got both Christian Kirk and AJ Green as free agents, but I think that the presence of Rondale Moore makes it that really the only absolute need is to get a very good Z receiver, like a top two, like a top end number two receiver.
Yeah, you need a T. Higgins. You need a Michael Pittman Jr. You need a who's the name's escaping me right now, but the kid with the Chargers, like a Mike Williams type. Like those are the guys that you need outside, to pair with one Kyler, but two to pair with DeAndre. And so I think it's a high enough need that you need to invest in it. Um, but it's an obvious need because we've seen how bad this offense gets when DeAndre's not able to go.
Yeah. Um, and then you always need depth. But if you want guys to play, so are you willing to bring in another guy to play ahead of Rondale and give him a limited role, or are you ready to have him do kind of what you had Simmons do?
It does feel like they actually. I'll say this because me especially, but we give them a hard time about not having a plan, and it does feel like they had a plan this time, right?
Yes.
Like Like they were like, Christian, you're going in the slot this year. It'll give you an opportunity to display where you should have been playing all along. And lo and behold, what happens? He has his best season as a pro. And I'm not going to say it was because it was a contract year. I'm going to say it's because he's finally playing where he should be. But we've also got a guy that we're super excited about that we think is going to be better than you. And so, we're going to let you showcase your skills, and then be able to go out and go somewhere else. And then we'll be able to replace you with a more dynamic version of that.
Yes. At tight end, let's be honest, they need
They
tight
need
ends. They need tight ends. They need
they
all the
need
tight ends. They need starting
right.
tight ends. They need blocking tight ends. They need pass catching tight ends, and they need depth tight ends because the only guys that are on the roster that are signed are guys you've never heard of.
Yeah, they're really good.
They need all the tight ends.
Yeah, and I mean, so you look at it. This is a draft where you can get a good two-way tight end. This is a draft where you can get a fantastic blocking tight end. This is a draft where you can get a fantastic receiving tight end. So the question becomes, what do you get in free agency? And so that's the nice thing about this draft is that with the next positional or the next two positional groups we'll talk about, there are players that fit what they need. And because tight ends in Cliff's offense are, well, I shouldn't say that. We haven't, outside of Max this year, before the injury, we haven't seen them use tight ends or a singular tight end in both those roles, right? Like typically you've got, like you said, the blocking tight ends, the Darrell Daniels, the Max Williams, and then you've got your receiving tight ends in this offense. Max was the first one we saw kind of combine that this year at a higher level. But if you bring back an Ertz, then what happens? Well, you got to have a blocking tight end, right? Like you have to. I mean, I love Zach Ertz. I thought he and Kyler's rapport was amazing considering when and where they picked him up, right? Um, that being said, as much as I love Zach Ertz, I would wager that as he continues to get older, his low blocking skills are going to become almost non-existent.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's go to the next group of players, which basically was talk on the big guys up front, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers, and the pass rushers. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. Back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk, the positional needs on the offensive line. I think if we look at left tackle, not an immediate need. I think I'm comfortable with entering the season with DJ Humphries as your starter, as captain. He's very good. He did not play well. He didn't play great the second half of the season, but he's still one of the better starting tackles in the NFL. But we do want someone developing behind him. So you want to trust whoever who can come in, whether that's Kelvin Beachum, who's still under contract. So I look at the offensive line. You need someone who could be a fill in it at left tackle. Both guard positions are major question marks. Center, you're good. Right tackle, you're probably good as well.
Yeah, so I mean, the only question you have with DJ is, do you extend him or cut him? And I know people are saying, well, Jess just said he's comfortable with him being there. I don't know if you can keep him at 15.5 this year. And I'm not saying he's not worth that, but just with all the needs that they're going to have and then the type cap space, you're going to have to make a decision. You cut him and save, I think it's like 11-ish million, so you have 4.5 dead money. Or do you extend him and then put some of that owed money into a bonus and then, you get fancy and then maybe you give him $11.5 million bonus and now all of a sudden his cap it's just 4 million. Right. So like those are the decisions you have to make on him. Like you said, Beacham's back, and then Hudson's back. So they definitely need two guards. Jones early in the season played well at guard, and then he just kind of became a disaster
It's
towards.
weird because like he started off solid. If you watch that offensive line play at the beginning of the year, it was so cohesive, so solid. And
It
then
was it
when
was like, yeah, when Hudson went out, they just couldn't find their way all of a sudden.
well, and even before that, it was when Beecham was out and you had Josh Jones at right tackle, and then he went back in at guard. He didn't know how to play guard anymore.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny. I mean, it sucks, but it is what it is. Yeah, but I mean, I would say your level of need at those positions is high, and it could become like a red alert thing. Is if they decide that the best thing for the team to do is to cut DJ Humphreys, and that's another conversation and podcast for another day.
Oh, then that's a bad move for the locker room, but
Right, but you also have to look at cap space. I mean, that's one of the things you have to do for this season, because they're in a weird spot where people are going to blame Cliff and Kyler, but if they don't find a way to create cap space to bring in two guards, to bring in a wide receiver or a tight end and a running back, to bring in a defensive lineman and a pass rusher, this is going to be a team that you're going to be like, man, are they even going to be able to compete to make the playoffs this year? Because they have those holes, and you can't go in. I mean, even Max Garcia is a free agent, right? So like,
yes.
you can't you can't go in with the idea of Josh Jones and Sean Harlow as your guards, like, So between Garcia and the decision they have on Justin Pugh, all of these situations are going to be difficult. But it's I mean, outside of the next positional group, I don't know if there's a higher need on the roster.
Right. And we go to the defensive line. That's a tricky one because you have a guy in Zach Allen who looks like he's kind of broken out,
Yeah.
and like this would be the year where he should have a monster year, in a contract year and everything, and you still got J.J. Watt. So, but
And you
and
still
you've got young,
technically,
and you've technically still got Jordan Phillips, and you've
right.
got young talent that they. And I'll say this: they're a player that low key the Cardinals love is Rashard Lawrence.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you've got high end might be strong. You've got very good starters
I'm going to
and
say they
and
probably need
they
starter
need
quality. They need
they need that's what I was going to say. They need one more. So that's the thing is you look at it. They have Allen, who is, let's just say, above average. I think he's good, but because this was the first season that he was good, let's just say above average. You've got Watt, who's great when he plays. He's still all pro level, but you know it's again that question of how many games is he going to give you. And then you've got a bunch of really, really, really good rotational players. Like you said, they love Rashard Lawrence. He's got to find a way to stay healthy. That's been his bugaboo since he was at LSU.
mm-hmm.
Leki Fotu's a nice fit on this defense for a guy that gets 10 to 15 snaps a game. Same with Michael Dogby. All of those guys are are key contributors to a winning team. The
But you
problem is
you need
when
that
they
high, you need the starter play to be higher.
right when they're getting 20 plus snaps a game, it's a bad sign. And so you need a 2000, and I think it was 16 when Peters had that monster year. That's what you need. Or was it, and then the 2014 when they drafted Rodney Gunter, and everybody was like, holy cow, this dude's going to be phenomenal. And then his play just kind of tailed off. But like, that's what you need, is you need one more of those guys that can play at a high level. And the class in free agency and the draft can yield at least one of those guys.
And that's hopefully we get that. Let's move outside to the edge. this is an interesting thing because Chandler Jones is going to be a free agent. So whether it's him or somewhere else, they need a top pass rusher. They need a number one pass rusher so that Marcus Golden can remain your number two. And then other than that, you always need depth. So you need a premier, maybe not top five, but you need a premier number one pass rusher, and then you need to continue to add guys beneath. You need a secondary guy off the bench who's going to give you pass rush in limited stretches. It's not going to cost a lot. Devon Kennard's probably not going to be that guy. That was a huge disappointment for me how that played out. But they need someone behind Golden and whoever the other guy is going to be the pass rushing relief who can come in and still make an impact from time to time when Golden and the other starter is not in the game for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Like, you need a guy that you need a guy. I mean, and what I mean by that is, like, you need a Chandler Jones level player, and those don't grow on trees.
No, the Chandler Jones decision is going to be, and we'll talk about that on the next show. That's a big decision they have to make.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing with this offseason is, man, they got decisions all over the place, right? Like, they've got big decisions that they have to come down to and make heading into this offseason to decide the fate of the franchise, and so to speak. And Jones is one of those guys, but they got to find a guy. I mean, they got to find a guy that can generate 10 to 15 sacks, and
they have that in Golden, but he's
always been better.
He's
as the
best
guy.
when he's secondary, but he can do that. He can do that sometimes. So here's my take on Golden as well. If you have a Golden-like player on the other side, Golden can still be great.
Yeah, if you have two of those guys, you'll be fine. But you better make sure that you've got two of them, and not, like you said, like a Devon Kennard who just kind of disappointed in his time here.
And then at the inside linebacker position, I'll be honest, I don't think the Cardinals need, like, in terms of needs, I don't think they have absolutely any need at that position, because you've got your veteran Hicks. Now, we don't know what's going to happen to him. So you're either going to keep him on the roster with Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins, and then your mishmash, and Tanner Vallejo's still under contract, so they like him. So that's a position they don't need to add anyone. It's just what they do with the guys that they have on the roster is going to be the question.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I mean, if Walker and Vallejo are your backups to Simmons and Collins, I think you're okay with that, right?
You'd think so, assuming that next year that Simmons and Collins are playing every down.
Right. So that's the big thing.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. We'll wrap up the show talking about the last few positions. We'll talk about the cornerbacks, the safeties, and then the specialists. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Cornerback is another position of major concern.
You have two, right?
You need two. You need at least one who is definitely a starter, and a second who could be.
Yeah, so I would say two. And again, this comes back to, this is a great draft to need corners. So if you end up with one in the draft and one in free agency, and that one in the draft is, a guy that is your fourth guy, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's actually a good thing for this team. I think, it's clearly been one of the biggest issues in the entire Kime regime.
And then at safety, that is another position, like at inside backer. I don't think they have any need beyond depth. And the type of depth they need at safety are simply guys who can play special teams.
You wonder how well Deontay played this year and what they think of James Wiggins, if they're going to do anything, or if carrying both those guys who are injury prone, and I hate saying that. I mean, you know how much that kills me, but that are injury prone, if that's a bugaboo, and so they go with keeping Wiggins because he's more athletic and younger and more athletic, and then going to get a veteran, kind of like a Chris Banjo was a couple years ago when he was healthier and could play, more snaps.
Yeah.
I don't think you can. I don't think you can go two in the draft, or you go with one in the draft unless you change routes and you stick with Deontay and you're going to get rid of James. But like, you can't. You either have to go a veteran that can play in a pinch, or another young guy that can be a special teamer and a backup. You can't go in. I just don't feel like you can go in with like a Wiggins and a rookie. Like
Well,
that,
it's
I
weird because I thought Sean Williams. We thought that was going to be that guy that didn't make it out of camp.
yeah, and every year that happens, right? There's one that we're like, oh, this we see what they're doing, and then they don't, and you're like, huh, misread that one.
Right. Well, what was weird about the Sean Williams one is because he was one of the guys that actually he wasn't one of those just extra guys that they signed. They held a press conference for him. He addressed the media. That was one of the guys that sounded like they counted on being on the roster, and it turned out that they needed the special teams guys that they already had instead of him. That was such a weird move to me that offseason, because it made so much sense until it didn't.
Yeah, until it didn't pan out.
So we look at the specialist positions. We've got Andy Lee, who's a free agent. You've got Aaron Brewer, who's technically a free agent, and then you've got Matt Prater, who's got a year left on his deal. Obviously, you need a long snapper. Obviously, you need a punter. The question is whether they're going to go the long.
I'd bring Brewer back, and I would find a new punter, and that's not a shot at Lee because he's really good, but I'd start to find some younger guys, because here's my thought process. Like you said, the Brewer, they basically sign every year, right? Like they bring him back every year.
He had a 3-year deal, so this is the first time in a while he's been a free agent. So, but I mean, Matt Prater is the best kicker in football practically when he's got Lee and Brewer. When he's got anyone else there, it's highly questionable.
Yeah, and my only concern is this, and not that I disagree at all. My only concern is 2023, and is if you re-sign Brewer and Lee to 1-year deals each, in 2023, it's completely plausible that you have to re-sign, or that you have to find a new kicker, a new punter, and a new long snapper. And that's just asking a lot, right? Like, so maybe this year you find the new punter, and then maybe next year you find another new kicker, depending on how Prater does and what kind of money you want to pay him. So that's the only reason I would advocate it is to get younger. Like, you can't bring in, and I don't even know any, but you can't bring in somebody Andy Lee's age, right? Like, if you're going to do that, then just stick with Lee. But you better bring in somebody young if you're going to go that route.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to. Yeah, it's so many questions on this team, honestly. But
and that's what's disappointing, right? I think, to like wrap up or kind of tie a bow on all of this, what's disappointing is that there are legitimate questions and things that we could be talking about in regards to the Arizona Cardinals right now, instead of a 24-year-old deleting a bunch of Instagram.
We could be talking
posts
about roster here's that thing. Going back to, I believe this is the decision makers in the front office letting this out so that we're not talking about the flaws on the roster. We're talking about the flaws in the quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that's a completely reasonable assumption to make, man.
And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, episode 346. And when we come back, hopefully we don't have to, honestly, let's hope we're not talking about anything else when it comes to Kyler Murray next week, unless
A
there's
contract extension resolution.
something new and something good. But we will be back in a week. We'll be preparing for free agency in a way. We are going to be talking about salary saving moves. We're going to we'll talk about as well the Cardinals' own free agents and what we think they should do with them. So on behalf of the Rise of C-Red podcast, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always, and we will be back again next week. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.